Hi, this is Dave. Here's the question for the day. Are limiting beliefs holding you down? Now, before you think this is too general, I want to mention that this is one of those concepts that might just hold the key to unlocking your potential and the potential in your business. Are limiting beliefs holding you down? Let's get into it. So here's a question I was asked. In your training, do you focus on instilling new skills, or do you try to remove the hindrances to people using their existing skills? Let me repeat it because it's one of the best questions I've ever been asked. In your training, do you focus on instilling new skills, or do you try to remove the hindrances to people using their existing skills? That was one of the best questions I have ever been asked. And honestly, I recall it clearly. I was having lunch with the CEO of a large nonprofit organization, and I had a contract with him to be training their social workers in sales skills. As a professional speaker, author, trainer, it's a question that I have considered for decades. It's one of those things that as a professional that I think about. Now, I realize the rest of the world probably has never thought about that, but I do. And it really speaks to the heart of the task of helping someone improve and develop. And while it is a deep question that I've considered, I never expected to hear it from a client. But there it was. And the answer is that we, the teachers and trainers of the world, do both. We teach the practices and competencies that are proven and fundamental for success in sales and leadership. And in many cases, these are new skills, new ideas, and new practices for the learner. At some point in the process, though, a very predictable phenomena occurs. When the learner accepts intellectually the value of what has been taught, he or she then makes no or very limited effort to actually put it into practice. That's the issue. So, it's a two-step process. First, the learner needs to become aware of some practice, process, idea, or skill. That's first. Then, they need to intentionally work to put it into practice. Two things. The first step's easiest. It only takes a small amount of effort to identify practices, processes, and skills which have been proven to be effective in your job or profession. No matter what your job, I suspect that there are at least 5 books written on the subject and at least 20, maybe even 2,000 websites offering solutions. A 15-minute web search will probably uncover enough practices and ideas to keep you busy for weeks. So from the trainer's perspective, the more important issue is identifying the combination of practices and processes, ideas and strategies that will have the most impact at this moment for this group or individual. Whenever I'm contracted to speak at a national sales meeting, for example, in a conversation with the meeting planner, I always say something like this, quote, I could do 40 hours of training for your group, but we don't have 40 hours. We only have three or four. So the question is, which combination of principles and practices will get you the biggest bang for the buck? Let's sort through the possibilities and prioritize those that hold the greatest potential for making an impact. And then, in the course of a 60-minute phone call, we can always identify a group of practices that will bring the greatest improvement in results. So that part of the process, identifying the new things to teach or learn, really is relatively simple. We have tools and we have assessments and things like that. It's a relatively simple process. But the real challenge lies in the second part, helping the learner to actually use those practices. For someone intent on helping people develop, tap into their potential, become more successful, it is the primary hurdle. I call it the gap between idea and action. The gap between idea and action. It's relatively easy to transmit ideas. It's relatively difficult to help the individual put them into action. It's a complex problem with lots of reasons that dissuade people at different times and places. For example, those reasons can be as simple and superficial as not having enough time. Somebody says, I was so busy with other things, I just didn't have time to give it the thought necessary to make the change. That's probably the most common reason why people don't bridge the gap between idea and action. Fear of discomfort comes with any change in behavior is also one of the most common. They may not say this, but they think it. I'm not comfortable doing that new thing. I'm not an expert at it, and I feel foolish for a while. I'd rather not pay the price of feeling foolish to gain a new skill. So there's two common beliefs. However, the most potent obstacles aren't those. The list of reasons why the gap between idea and action is a difficult one to traverse can go on for pages, and I'll save that for future posts. For now, I'd like to focus on a class of obstacles to changed and better behavior. And that class of obstacles is our pre-existing beliefs. As an educated and experienced practitioner in the profession of helping people change their behavior, I've come to the conclusion that our set of pre-existing beliefs supplies the largest and most potent set of obstacles to self-improvement and is the most difficult hurdle preventing greater success and fulfillment. Human beings naturally make observations and conclusions about our experiences as we grow up and experience life. Eventually, some of those become hardened into beliefs, and those beliefs form the base set of assumptions about the world, and then we make choices and live our lives based on those beliefs and assumptions. For example, let me take it from the abstract to the concrete here. A child can have a difficult relationship with one of his parents and then begins to think that all people of that sex are arbitrary or aggressive or can't be trusted. So he forms a confirmation-based bias, which leads him to look for those things in others of that sex. After a couple of experiences that seem to confirm his bias, that belief that men, or maybe women, are arbitrary, aggressive, and can't be trusted, that belief coalesces into a stronger belief and then begins to influence all of his or her behavior. So this belief becomes buried into deeper layers of the person's heart. It burrows into the subconscious level. He doesn't even know that he believes it. He just operates on the basis of it. So when he's dating, for example, he sees his potential life mates through the lens of this pre-existing belief, and that hinders his relationships with the opposite sex. So that's an example. Now he may go on to an excellently presented workshop on, quote, communicating with the opposite sex, for example, and he may learn some of the best practices of communication, but he is unable to put them into practice because the gap between idea and action harbors his belief, and that belief prevents him from turning the good idea into action. With the best of intentions to implement his newly found practices, his belief trumps his intellectual assent and prevents him from following through. His potential for a loving, lifelong relationship is hindered because of the unconscious belief that he developed along the way. This process is such a part of human life that every human being struggles with it. The Bible, for example, calls these unconscious beliefs strongholds and indicates that they're destroyed through the spiritual power inherent in Christianity. Well, limiting beliefs are not just an individual issue. They can be distributed among affinity groups of people and become part of the culture of that group. Families have limiting beliefs that they share, as do larger communities. Here's one of the best examples is an experience that my wife and I had on one of our travel experiences. Occurred in the 90s when we were visiting Soweto, the African township on the outskirts of Johannesburg, South Africa. On the day that we were there, the children were on strike, refusing to go to school. Even stranger than that was the reason they were on strike. The reason they were striking was they objected to being graded as individuals. Their tribal belief system promoted the idea that they were a closely connected group and that any attempt to recognize that one person did better than another was an attack on the group. Either the whole class passed or the whole class failed. That was their idea. The individual had value not as an individual, but only as a part of the larger group. You can see, as with all these kind of cultural components, these beliefs have consequences. A family can share a belief that all authority figures are arbitrary and not to be respected, and as a result, family members are regularly in trouble with employers and the courts, you see. In my Soweto example, the belief holds people down, prevents individual achievement that would lift up the entire community. And as a result, the community lives at a level of subsistence, generation after generation. While these two examples illuminate some life-changing and society-impacting beliefs, not all limiting beliefs are so potent. We all have a host of them that impact our on-the-job performance. It's those that I find at play in the work that I do. In earlier blog posts, I've identified a number of them that impact professional salespeople and hold them back. For example, salespeople are good talkers. That's a belief. That's an errant belief. That holds people back. That's one. Here's another one. I have great relationships with my customers. That's an errant belief that holds people back. So the world is full. I mean, each of us has these errant beliefs that hold us back. Now, beliefs can be both positive and negative. In Martin Seligman's great book, Learned Optimism, he describes the impact that positive beliefs can have in bringing success to one's life. Not everyone is hindered by the gap between idea and action. For example, some, typically about 20 to 30% of a training class, go on to incorporate the new practices into their routines, and they enjoy the positive outcomes as a result. The focus of this article is not on developing positive beliefs. We'll save that for another article, but rather on overcoming negative ones. It's not the minority who seamlessly incorporate the training against my focus. It's the majority who don't. In many ways, our development as human beings is dependent on our ability to eliminate and overcome our limiting beliefs. Since limiting beliefs are subconscious and they influence our behavior, the way to identify them is to study our behavior. Patterns of behavior that seem to be unreasonable, that often lead to negative outcomes, are often indicators of a limiting belief that prompted that behavior. Back to our example of a man raised with a limiting belief about the opposite sex. If he sees himself acting unreasonably in multiple situations, then that behavior indicates a pattern, and that pattern of unreasonable negative behavior indicates a limiting belief. See, our beliefs influence our behavior, and when we see a negative pattern of behavior, it indicates there's a negative belief underlying it. For example, he may get overly angry at the slightest perceived insult, when none was intended and other reasonable people would not have acted that way. A little introspection indicates that this is a pattern of behavior, that it's become habitual. Those are indications that there's a limiting belief prompting that behavior. So the first step is to identify patterns of unreasonable negative behavior. Friends, family members, and colleagues can provide some insight into this. The next step is to identify the belief that prompted that behavior. This is where a professional consultant can help. If you're working by yourself, ask the question, why? And as objectively as possible, search for the belief. See if you can uncover and label it. Give it words and describe it. This is difficult work. Multiple books have been written on various aspects of it. It's much more complex than my few words indicate. Once you identify the negative behavior and the underlying belief, you can attack it at both levels. You can become aware of the behavior. Whenever you find yourself in that situation, follow one of Seligman's techniques. Simply tell yourself to stop and then switch to some other behavior. Do that enough, repeat it enough times, and you'll have built a more positive habit. Or you can attack it on the level of the belief. Now that you have uncovered it and labeled it, argue with yourself. Think through all the reasons why that belief is false. Convince yourself that the belief is unfounded and leads to negative behavior. Defeat the belief itself. You may find it helpful to formulate a positive rule and substitute it every time that old belief expresses itself. If you can successfully bridge the gap between idea and action, you will have gained a self-improvement tool that will serve you well for the rest of your life. Now, if you're going to really pursue that, then you need help. You need support. You need to continually put into your head good ideas, positive ideas. That's what I call content. You need content. And also, you need people around you to support you, like-minded people who can support you. You need connections. And that's why we have the XI community. XI stands for Excellence and Influence. It is a one-stop online community that provides content and connections for people wanting to build excellence and influence into their lives and their businesses. I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay, that's it. We're done. Bye-bye.